Welcome back to Q Dads, it's me Ste, and yes, episode 8 delivers us a fantastic end to the episode with the introduction of 3 new people. We're going to be breaking down who we believe those 3 people are, and the biggest question is where they've come from, and if they somehow relate back to Solo. And of course, we're going to be chatting about Lukas and his potential new relationship with Sims. So, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, as it really does help the channel to grow, and we're going to be covering Severance in just under 2 weeks now, so we're really looking forward to that. And you're not going to want to miss those breakdowns and even deeper dives into that crazy show. And now, just before we start, please remember guys, no spoilers in the comments. We're discussing the show from the TV series point only. Thanks. So, the episode ends with the introduction of 3 new people. So Juliette, obviously after suffering from the bends, goes back underwater, remembering Solo's advice to rebalance the pressure in her body. Then on the way back up, she looks for the person who has taken Solo. Obviously, she's confronted with someone who attacks her, and someone else actually shoots her with an arrow, which is insane and completely unexpected. More on the arrow thing towards the end, as we have a very interesting theory on the whole bow concept. But after a little bit of patchwork, she then goes back to what she believes to be Solo's body on the floor. But no, it isn't. It's actually a young boy who she defends off and manages to pin to the floor. Now, this is where we see the introduction of 2 further people. One with a bow and arrow, and one who's just standing by observing. But what does this mean? Yes, this is a big reveal. We did predict for someone else to be in the silo, but I was honestly thinking that it was just an individual person that came with Solo, or is a friend of Solo's. But actually, this is the introduction of 3 new people, which means there could be even more survivors. And if I'm being honest, I personally think it's almost certain there's a whole population of people living within the silo now, or outside of it. It's obvious, but we have to ask ourselves who these people are. So one of our predictions is actually that these are the people that Solo spoke of, like his friend Lapis. Could the girl with the arrow actually be Lapis, who actually he didn't know from when he was a child, but knew them as younger children, and maybe he was their teacher? And what they've been doing is living in the silo this whole time, but then that would not explain why Solo isn't letting them into the vault. There has to be some kind of trigger event that caused the separation between these potential assumed friends. But then the flip side of this, actually, if the 3 of them have been surviving in Silo 17 for all this time, and there's potentially more of them, like a small group of people, then how are they surviving? Where are they getting all their food from? Medical supplies, resources? Are these survivors from the rebellion we saw in episode 1 people who did not want to venture out of the vault? Or are they completely new people? A new generation altogether? And maybe Solo was the head of IT, or otherwise known as Russell, the story he fabricated to Juliette, and is actually not allowing any of them into the vault, because the rebellion is technically still going on. But then also comes the question, is what have they done to Solo? I don't believe they've taken him, or he's been killed. I think they tried to ambush him, absolutely, and he was hurt, but I think he's retreated to the vault, and he's probably remaining in the vault until Juliette cracks the code to get in and give him medical assistance, or until he lets her in out of pure desperation. But either way, I'm not sure how Juliette is going to get away from these 3 people. This is most certainly an interesting thing and shakes things up massively. So now, as mentioned, just as we end this section, I want to talk about the bow and arrow. Now, this is a very interesting weapon. So, throughout the flashbacks, I'm not sure we ever saw one. What would the need be to create one? Gunpowder exists in the silo, and clearly guns are easier to use. Now, had this been a typical post-apocalyptic series, bows make perfect sense for hunting. But the silo had farms, so that kind of rules out the idea from there. Now, is it possible they've always been there, just unused in rebellions? But I'm pretty sure a volley of arrows would have worked wonders when the rebellion was going on in Solo 17. Even if one side had guns, the beauty of an arrow is it can arc, whereas bullets don't. So when they're on the bridge, surely firing arrows would have made much more sense than just trying to take it over on its own. So this does lead me to ask though, where did they even get the knowledge to create a bow? If Solo has never let anyone into the vault, then they couldn't have got the knowledge from there. However, throughout this episode we learn that Solo 18 had most of their knowledge ripped away from them for this so-called greater good. So, could Solo 17 just have had the knowledge lying around? Again though, if that's the case, why were arrows not used in the rebellion to take out the bridge? Now, this is where mine and Ben's theories sort of collide. Could these people actually be from another silo? Have they been in the outside world and able to hunt things properly? Or do other silos have different terrains? Maybe there's a silo that has even less access to electronics, forcing people to live closer to nature, in a sense. Either way, I'm very much looking forward to next week's episode to hopefully get an explanation on these new people and where the bow came from. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Now, swiftly moving on, we have to talk about the whole Salvador Quinn story, where Lucas discovered that the book Judge Meadows was after, that has Salvador Quinn's message in, was actually his own copy of the Pact, and not the Wizard of Oz, as Bernard alluded to. Now, Ben did mention this felt cheap to him, that the whole book being Salvador Quinn's just felt a bit lazy, whereas I like that. It's almost like hiding the mystery in plain sight, because you'd think if he was going to attempt to make a code, he wouldn't use his own copy of the Pact, but he did, and the way you're led there is by underlines of messages that, if you just read it normally, would make it look like he was actually just highlighting certain parts of the Pact, where in fact he's actually sending you elsewhere. I think that's genius, and I really like the fact that his message essentially is hidden in plain sight. Now, as Lucas deciphered the message essentially went along the lines of, if you got this far, you know the game is rigged, meaning you can't win. But what does that actually mean? Felt a little bit unappealing according to Ben, whereas, as I mentioned, I quite like the pessimistic nature behind it straight away. But as for the message, I think it means an overarching message. It doesn't matter what you do, nothing's ever going to change. So if you follow the route of the head of IT and protect the silo and follow the rules of the Pact, you continue living in the facade of a life. Yet if you go against the head of IT, you're either sent out to clean and ultimately led to your death, meaning the game is over for you, or you bring the downfall of the silo. Thousands of people die, and that means the game is over. So it makes us ask the question, how can you beat a game if it's rigged? Is it ultimately by teamwork? Do IT and mechanical have to come together? Practicality and curiosity forming the ultimate team? And have the clues to alternate power supplies and random doors at the bottom of the silo being left on purpose for the whole silo to discover and open? As it's clear the world up top is still dangerous, but the doors below could be something else. And as me and Ben have mentioned many times, we somehow think the silos are interlinked. Yes, it does seem far-fetched, but with how the Order forces a class-like structure on the silo's residents, it's always bothered me, as surely the only way for the silo to truly survive is by everyone helping each other. So maybe this is part of the plan. Ultimately, there are two endings to every silo: rebellion and death, or unity and new discoveries. Now, again, you might ask, new discoveries? Well, me and Ben have a theory for that. We've constantly toyed about the possibility of some kind of overseer facility. Could that be Silo 1? Or even something in the distant city? Either way, we're unsure where the series is going, whether that be up and out or down and further in. Let us know your thoughts in the comments on this crazy theory. Now, Ben moaning like he normally does, wanted me to point out what he believes to be a continuity error. He said during the cafeteria scene there were no spoons in the serving tray. So he said, how are people supposed to eat? He seemed very annoyed by this. So here's what I'm going to say to you guys. Are there any other continuity errors you have seen throughout the series? If so, let us know in the comments, as he really does like to moan about these details and he enjoys reading about them. Next, I want to talk about our good friend Sims. It does seem like he was accusing Bernard of doing what he is now starting to do, and that is to burn his bridges, as he attempts to make a play at swaying Lucas. Now, I'm not going to lie, I have put in my notes a few times that Lucas will be betrayed by Bernard, so I do think Sims is right here. My only issue is Sims is as bad as Bernard and also can't be trusted. Again, I'm not sure of Sims' plan. I think ultimately he wants to have Bernard's job, and I question if Sims would actually be able to keep the silo safer than Bernard, in the instance he gets to that position. Let me know your thoughts. And while we're here, let's talk about Lukas. It's clear power started to corrupt him slightly. Now, is this because of curiosity or the worry that Bernard will cast him away if he fails to decode the message? I'm not sure, but as much of a wanker as he was in the first part of the episode, his redemption is better. And again, when he returns to Salvador's relatives, he has returned to his more caring self. And this is personally why I think he will betray Bernard, as it's clear now that the 4 days Judge Meadows was gone for was at the point she cracked Salvador Quinn's code, and it seems Lukas is following her journey, almost like a conquest. Now, unlike Meadows, I think Lukas will attempt to leak this information to more people and accidentally spark the rebellion, while ultimately trying to save people, especially when the opening line of Salvador Quinn's message is the game is rigged. Now, just before we throw it over to you, I was sad to see Walker's character get almost demolished in this episode. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there, as ultimately I think Walker will somehow get the better of Bernard. Finally, to wrap up, I still think the parts in Silo 17 are dragging on somewhat. We're so close to something every week, only for it to cut right at the moment where information is about to drop. Obviously, with only 2 episodes to go, TV shows like to save it for a big reveal, but personally, I think they could have progressed Solo 17's story a little more in this episode. What do you think? So, my questions to you, but remember please, no spoilers, we're fully basing things on the show alone. 1. Is Solo dead? And are these people former friends of his? Will Lukas tell Bernard of his discovery, as I assume he will fully decipher the code next week? And finally, will we get to see the vault of Silo 17? Right guys, let me know in the comments your thoughts. Thanks for stopping by, and don't forget to subscribe as it really helps the channel to grow. And as we said, in 2 weeks time, Severance Series 2 drops, and we'll be covering the absolute crap out of that show as it's so intriguing and random that why wouldn't you? Anyway guys, thanks for stopping by, and as always, we'll catch you next time with something new.